God energy in the psyche to try to keep it under control in some way. In other words, compulsive behaviors are equally manifestations of this pathological infantile grandiosity. It's very important to see in this case that you cannot in any simplistic way moralize or blame this individual for the struggle that they're in. Can you see that? This is not their fault. They cannot be blamed for this at all. The compulsive behaviors that they engage in, whether they're like me and they tend to be a workaholic, or whether they have eating disorders, or whether they have some form of addictive compulsive behavior. According to this self-psychology, this is all manifestation of a struggle with an unconscious, grandiose self-organization which is not being adequately related to by the individual ego or conscious mind. It's very important, yes?
Would that also include codependency?
Yes, it would. Now, we need to get a little sense. I'd like for you to think about this in the context of trying to become much more aware of certain types of behaviors that we all experience. That is to say, here is the assumption that I want you to entertain tonight. I want you to entertain the assumption that all of us had less than perfect childhoods. See? Right? And I want you to entertain the possibility that we didn't have enough camels and sheep standing around and admiring us at various times. And it's just possible that in every one of us in this room there remains some rather primitive aspects of this childhood grandiosity still around. Now, if it is, there will be little signs of it. And I'd like to take just a little bit of time right now for us to work together on what some little clues may be that you may notice. Well, let's start. The self-psychologists are really wonderful in being empathic to people's struggle with their grandiosity. And what I love about the way they do this, they are not moralistic about this. They don't moralize at people about their struggle with their infantile grandiosity. They are capable of being a good example for us Christians on this issue. There are a lot of these little signs. One, let's just go through a list of them. I want to give you a list of marks of recognizing this residual, untransformed, the way they talk about it, we'll talk Jungian about it in a minute. But they talk about untransformed, untransmuted, primitive grandiosity that remains influencing you. Depreciation tendencies. That is, if you notice yourself spending a lot of energy depreciating yourself or other people, that's a dead giveaway. Now, people normally think that is my I. That's Robert criticizing Robert. According to the self-psychologist, when Robert says to Robert, "Oh, you're never going to amount to anything," that's not the true self of Robert speaking to Robert. According to the self-psychologist, that is a voice coming off of the grandiosity. The grandiose self-organization, in effect, has a voice in my psyche. And it says to me, and conceivably, that was a lousy book that you published. Or, you should have published 2 books, 10 books, 100 books. They all should have been better. You notice that split infinitive. Whatever. You put your own version of this. One of the things I like to do with groups of people is to have them write down these thoughts that they have about themselves. I will never blank. Or, you're never going to ever learn so-and-so. You fill in the blank with your own thoughts. according to self-psychology, these things are normally coming off of the grandiose self-organization. The punitive, self-rejecting, discouraging thoughts are normally coming off of that. So anytime you notice depreciation of self or others, if there's a lot of energy going into depreciating other people, it's probably coming off of a primitive organization of the grandiosity. Why do you say that? Because if you've got your grandiosity in harness, according to the self-psychologist, you're expending it in creation. You're doing something useful with it. See? It's going into productivity. You don't have time to be criticizing other people. You're too busy doing something useful. See? So that's one form. We've talked about eating disorders. If you have any problem with eating disorders, overeating or bulimic kinds of patterns, this would be understood by self-psychologists as a direct expression of the struggle that you have dealing with this thing in your psyche that has not been digested, in effect. In other words, when you see someone struggling with a diet, you have right before you there a person that's struggling with the appetite of a giant within. See? It's not the true self of that individual that's that hungry all the time. See? It's the grandiose self-organization. Because, see, the grandiose self-organization within is insatiable. You can't feed it enough. You can't feed it enough food. You can't feed it enough booze. You can't feed it enough drugs. You can't give it enough sex. So behind all of the compulsive behaviors, the self-psychologists see that organization. Insomnia. The self-psychologists see sleep difficulties as often directly related to this grandiose organization. And it can be related in this way. There are a number of things that happen to you when when the grandiose self-organization within is not adequately transformed and integrated. It tends to overstimulate you. Now think about this. When you're in touch with it, it tends to overstimulate you. Insomnia, the self-psychologist would say, is a mark of the fact that the grandiose self-organization is getting you revved up too much. And you have not learned ways to calm yourself and to soothe yourself. See? Because this thing is too big. It's like I like to say to people that are trying to understand this, it's like a big, excited Saint Bernard that smells the food. And he starts lunging against the door. And so what you've got to do is try to find some way to calm him down. See? And a lot of people drink too much at night because they're so overstimulated. They can't get down. They can't calm down. So they can go to sleep. A lot of people, this country is full of Valium junkies. People are taking enormous amounts of Valium to cope with their unintegrated, grandiose self-organization. Okay. But there are other ways in which this thing manifests, besides overstimulation. Now, you can think of the various ways in which you may manifest types of overstimulation of this thing within. But there's another thing that we see, according to the self-psychologist, and that is called defending against grandiosity. Now, what forms does that take? For example, a person with extremely low self-esteem who does not feel that he or she is very important, often the self-psychologist will say that person is defending desperately against the presence of the grandiosity. Why? Because there is a fear in the psyche that if they let themselves know anything about themselves being good are okay